This is English shorthand dictation number 71 and the dictation speed is 160 words per minute. Ready? Start. Mr. President, sir, I consider it a great honor to be called upon to be the first speaker after the election of the permanent chairman of the Constituent Assembly. On behalf of this House, I offer to him our most respectful congratulations on the unique honor that has been conferred on him. This Constituent Assembly has met here to frame the Constitution to effect the withdrawal of British control, political, economic, and military, and to establish a free, independent India. If successful, this transfer of authority will be the biggest and the least bloody of all transfers in human history. The first Britisher to arrive in this country was a Jesuit missionary in 1579. He was followed by merchants who came to trade but stayed to rule. In 1765, the authority was transferred to the East India Company. Later, it was gradually subordinated to and replaced by the authority of Parliament, and it has been continuing till now on the principle fundamental to imperialism, that is philanthropy plus 5%. On that principle it has worked. However, right through, there were protests against the British rule. All these protests became canalized when the Indian National Congress was established in 1885. It adopted mild methods till the advent of Mahatma Gandhi, when it became aggressive and dynamic. In 1930, the resolution for the independence of India was passed at Lahore, and we are now here to give effect to that resolution. The British are empirics from beginning to end. One of the British Prime Ministers had once said, "We British have no eternal principles, we have only eternal interests. When they adopt any particular line of action, you may take it that it is not a willing surrender of power or authority, but it is response to the historic necessities of the case. When the discontent grew up, they gave us the Parliamentary reforms, and they introduced the principle of communal electorates, and these communal electorates were intended to keep the people apart. The higher mind of Britain advised the local officials that they would betray the trust placed upon them if they foisted communal electorates. They would inject a poison into the very body politic which could be removed, if at all, at the cost of a civil war. We know how those anticipations are getting realized today. After that, we had the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, and then the 1935 Act, the Cripps Mission, and now the Cabinet Plan. The latest statement of His Majesty's government on this question indicates how it is not in human nature to surrender power easily. Playing off one section against another is unworthy of a great people. It is much too clever to be permanent and would embitter the relations of this country and Great Britain. It is essential for the British to understand that if an act is done, it must be done with the utmost grace. All the same, we are here assembled to draw up a constitution for future India. A constitution is the fundamental law of the nation. It should embody and express the dreams and passions, the ideals and aspirations of the people. It must be based on the consent of all and respect the rights of all people who belong to this great land. We have been kept apart. It is our duty now to find each other. Speakers yesterday and day before yesterday deplored the abstention of the representatives of the Muslim League from this Constituent Assembly. We take it that it will only be temporary, for their cooperation is absolutely essential for the success of any constitution which we may lay down. But in approaching these matters, our attitude should be one of realism. Take the common problems from which we suffer: our hunger, our poverty, our disease, our malnutrition. Take the psychological evils from which we suffer: the loss of human dignity, the slavery of the mind, the stunting of sensibility, and the shame of subjection. These are common to all, Hindus or Muslims, princes or peasants. The chains may be made of gold, but they are still chains that fetter us. Even the princes will have to realize that they are slaves in this country. If they have a sufficient sense of self-respect and exercise a little self-analysis, they will find how much their freedom is fettered. The people, whether they are Hindus or Muslims, princes or peasants, belong to this one country. Earth and heaven have combined to make them belong to one another. If they try to disown it, their gait, their cast of countenance, their modes of thought, their ways of behavior, they will all betray them. It is not possible for us to think that we belong to different nationalities. Our whole ancestry is there. It is essential for any constitution which is drawn up to make all the citizens realize that their educational, social, and economic privileges are afforded to them, that there will be cultural autonomy, that nobody will be suppressed, that it will be a constitution which will be democratic in the true sense of the term, where from political freedom we will march on to economic freedom and equity. Every individual should feel that he is proud to belong to this great land. Apart from all these, a nation does not depend on identity of race or sentiment or on ancestral memories, but it depends on a persistent and continuous way of life that has come down to us. Such a way of life belongs to the very soil of this land. It is indigenous to this country as much as the waters of the Ganges or the snows of the Himalayas. From the very roots of our civilization down in the Indus Valley to the present day, the same great culture is represented among Hindus and Muslims. We have stood for the ideal of comprehension and charity all these centuries. India is a symphony where there are, as in an orchestra, different instruments, each with its particular sonority, each with its special sound, all combining to interpret one particular score. It is this kind of combination that this country has stood for. It never adopted inquisitorial methods. It never asked the Parsis or the Jews or the Christians or the Muslims who came and took shelter there to change their creeds or become absorbed in what might be called a uniform Hindu humanity. It never did this. Live and let live. That has been the spirit of this country. If we are true to that spirit, if that ideal which has dominated our cultural landscape for 5 or 6,000 years and is still operating, I have no doubt that the crisis by which we are faced today will be overcome as many other crises in our previous history have been overcome. Suicide is the greatest sin. To murder yourself, to betray yourself, to barter away your spiritual wealth for a mess of pottage, to try to preserve your body at the expense of your spirit is the greatest sin. If we, therefore, stand out for the great ideal for which this country has stood, the ideal which has survived the assaults of invaders, the ideals to which the unheeding world today is turning its attention, if we are able to do it, the flame which has sustained us in overcoming foreign rule will fire our efforts to build a united and free India. It is not an accident that our temporary chairman and our permanent chairman both come from Bihar. They are both impregnated with the spirit of the invincibility of gentleness, the gospel of India. Gentleness can overcome the hardest things. It can overcome the softest things. There is nothing impossible to be overcome by gentleness, and therefore the sharpest weapon we have is gentleness. It is the greatest weapon which will wear out the highest kind of opposition. We have not been true to it. We have betrayed and done wrong to millions of our own fellow beings. It is now time for us to make atonement for all our past guilts. It is not a question of justice or charity. It is atonement. That is how I would put it. In Dr. Rajendra Prasad, we have one who embodies this spirit of gentleness. He is the soul of goodness. He has great patience and courage. He has suffered for India. It is not an accident that this year, which marks the 60th year of the Indian National Congress, is also the year of the opening of the Constituent Assembly. We have to remember with gratitude all those great souls who worked and suffered for the freedom of this country, for the dawn of this day. Thousands died. More thousands suffered privation, imprisonment, and exile, and it is their suffering that has cemented and built up this great edifice of the Indian National Congress. We have to remember them all. Dr. Rajendra Prasad is the suffering servant of India who incarnates the spirit for which this country stands. I only hope that this spirit of amity, concord, and harmony which has come down to us from the image of Pashupati in the Indus civilization down to Mahatma Gandhi, will inspire our efforts. Dr. Rajendra Prasad's election as permanent chairman is a supreme mark of the unstinted confidence that this assembly and the country as a whole repose in him. It is not so much an honor to him. He is really honoring us by accepting the invitation that we have extended to him. We have therefore really to felicitate ourselves on his allowing himself to be persuaded to take the chair of this assembly as permanent chairman.